Close your eyes. Picture yourself in a prison. Not one with bars and guards and questionable mashed potatoes, but one built entirely out of ideas. The walls? They're social expectations. The guards? They're rules you never voted on. And the warden? That nagging voice in your head, reminding you to floss. Welcome, dear listener, to the soft, slightly absurd world of Michel Foucault, the French philosopher who spent his life showing us that power doesn't just live in kings, presidents, or that one manager at work who schedules optional meetings. Power, Foucault tells us, lives in how we watch ourselves, discipline ourselves, and slowly become our own prison guards. Comforting, right? Don't worry, we'll sprinkle in some cozy humor so you can drift off instead of spiraling. Tonight, you'll float through Foucault's life and philosophy as if tucked under a weighted blanket of ideas. We'll stroll from medieval torture chambers, fun bedtime imagery, I know, to modern surveillance societies, where your phone knows what snacks you're craving before you do. And along the way, I'll whisper, I'll joke, I'll lull you deeper into sleep, while casually explaining why your morning routine is basically a mini panopticon. So, snuggle in, adjust your pillow, and prepare yourself for Your Mind is Your Prison, Foucault's philosophy to sleep to. Imagine the room you're in now, slowly dissolving into candlelight. Shadows crawl across the ceiling. The hum of modern appliances fades, and instead, you hear the distant creak of wooden doors and the faint drip of water echoing through stone halls. It's not scary. Not really. It's more like the cozy, slightly eerie setting of a bedtime story that's about to unfold. If Hans Christian Andersen had ever teamed up with a French philosopher who wore black turtlenecks and chain-smoked his way through lectures, this is probably the mood he'd set. And that philosopher would be Michel Foucault. If you've ever wondered why drifting off to sleep feels a little like letting your guard down in a world full of invisible rules, Foucault is your man. He whispers, not in lullabies, but in words like disciplinary regimes and biopower. Don't worry, those terms sound much scarier than they feel. We'll cradle them gently until they're no more threatening than the word pajamas. To set the scene for Foucault as your ghost story narrator, you have to imagine that you're about to be told a tale, not of witches or monsters, but of watchtowers and whispers. Instead of skeletons rattling their chains, think of bureaucrats stamping papers. Instead of vampires, picture security cameras blinking red in the dark. This is Foucault's haunted house. Not a castle, but the ordinary world around you, transformed into something strange by looking at it differently. He'd be the kind of storyteller who lowers his voice right when you're about to drift into dreams and says, "Have you ever noticed that the things you think are normal school bells, medical checkups, even the way you brush your teeth at night, are actually forms of discipline, quietly shaping who you are?" And then he'd pause, letting the question hang in the air like smoke, while you roll over under your blanket and think, wait, brushing my teeth is political? Before falling asleep, mid-thought. But don't panic. Foucault wasn't trying to keep you awake forever. In fact, once you lean into his rhythm, his philosophy can be surprisingly soothing. It's like someone turning on a nightlight in a room you didn't even know was dark. Suddenly, you realize the walls of your world are covered in faint inscriptions, rules and habits written so small you'd never noticed them before. He helps you see them not to terrify you, but to make you more aware, more awake to the structures that hold you. And awareness, ironically enough, is the perfect thing to relax into before slipping into unconsciousness, because it reminds you that sleep itself is one of those things we regulate. Bedtimes, morning alarms, Even the idea that we should get exactly 8 hours. These are all social scripts we've been taught. If you don't meet them, you feel guilty. You think you've done something wrong, even though your body might be perfectly fine with 6.5. See? Already, Foucault is there at your bedside, tucking you in with a reminder that guilt itself is a kind of invisible chain. Pleasant dreams. There's something ghostly about the way he approaches philosophy. Not ghostly in the sense of boo, but in the sense of haunting. He believed the past is never really gone. The dungeons, the torture chambers, the gallows they leave traces, echoes that ripple into the present. And you can feel that when you're lying in bed at night and your thoughts spiral from, "Did I lock the front door?" to, "Am I a good person?" And suddenly you're reliving embarrassing conversations from 10 years ago. That's Foucault's atmosphere. He would lean in, whisper through the darkness. That nagging memory is not just memory. It's discipline. It's the panopticon of your mind. And you're both prisoner and guard. Creepy? Maybe. Comforting? Somehow, yes. Because at least now you have a name for it. And once something has a name, you can put it down like a book on the nightstand. He's perfect as a bedtime guide because his whole project was noticing the unseen forces that direct our lives. Most horror stories want to scare you with things that go bump in the night. Foucault? He wants you to notice the things that go ding in the day. School bells, factory whistles, phone notifications, the gentle ding of your oven when your midnight cookies are ready. All of them tiny signals shaping you, nudging you, training you. It's spooky, yes, but also strangely funny. Imagine a ghost story where the big reveal is that the haunted house is just your local DMV. You're trapped forever, not because of demons, but because of paperwork. That's the kind of bedtime narrative Foucault spins. And it works, because once you laugh at it, the tension breaks, and your eyes get heavy, and you think, yes, even my yawns are scheduled. And here's the thing. Ghost stories usually resolve with either an exorcism or an escape, but Foucault rarely offered either. He didn't think you could escape the structures of power, because they were everywhere, woven into the fabric of life. Power wasn't a monster hiding under the bed, it was the bed itself. The blanket, the lullaby. Power was in the way you brush your hair, the way you line up for coffee, the way you silently know which side of the street to walk on. It's all so ordinary it vanishes into the background. And that's exactly why it feels like a ghost story. Not because the world is filled with jump scares, but because it's filled with invisible presences that shape you, whether you want them to or not. Listening to him is like drifting into a dream where the everyday becomes uncanny, where the familiar turns strange just long enough for you to notice it. And then, like mist, it fades, leaving you with the gentle comfort of understanding. So, as you lie there, eyes heavy, you can imagine Foucault himself as a spectral storyteller, not frightening but gently amused, chain smoking in the corner of your dream and telling you that society is less like a haunted forest and more like a series of softly glowing street lamps, always watching, always guiding, and always making you think you chose the path yourself. And then, in that moment between wakefulness and sleep, when you can't tell if you're dreaming or not, you hear him chuckle and say, "Your mind is your prison, but at least the sheets are comfy." And with that, you drift away. Michel Foucault was born in 1926, in a town in France, with a name that sounds elegant if you pronounce it with a French accent, and like a brand of luxury soap if you don't. He was not, at first glance, destined to become the kind of philosopher who would one day make people nervously joke about panopticons at dinner parties. He was a doctor's son, growing up in a middle-class family, expected to follow in his father's medical footsteps. Imagine young Foucault, dutifully trying to study anatomy while secretly thinking, "Actually, I'd rather dissect the entire history of human knowledge. Thank you very much." It's not that he wasn't bright enough for medicine, he was brilliant. It's that he had this itch to understand how the structures around us shape who we are. Medicine can heal your body, but philosophy, he must have thought, could diagnose your society. As a young man, he didn't exactly fit in. He was openly queer at a time when that was considered scandalous, and he wrestled with depression, once attempting suicide in his youth. But he also found refuge in books, in the dusty libraries where the rules of the world could be traced in ink and parchment. There's something soothing about picturing him, a young man wandering through shelves, running his hands along the spines, already searching for the ghosts of history that would later populate his books. He was like someone who kept hearing whispers in the wallpaper when everyone else insisted the house was silent. And instead of pretending not to hear them, he wrote them down. His academic journey was not smooth. He struggled in school sometimes, clashed with teachers, felt like an outsider. But then, at the École Normale Supérieure, one of the most elite schools in France, he found a home for his restless mind. Imagine him there, surrounded by students who would become some of France's most famous intellectuals, drinking strong coffee, wearing black, and debating into the night about things like truth and madness, while the rest of Paris was trying to dance. He was brilliant, intimidating, and also a little bit terrifying in debate. People who studied with him remembered his intensity, his sharp wit, and his tendency to cut right through an argument like a scalpel. If Socrates was a gadfly, then Foucault was more like a French raven, perched on the lecture podium, cawing out uncomfortable truths while everyone scribbled notes nervously. But his life wasn't just about the lecture halls. He taught abroad, moving through Sweden, Poland, and Germany. He absorbed ideas like a sponge, and not just from philosophy, psychology, history, literature. He pulled them all into his orbit. He was obsessed with understanding madness, not in a distant, clinical way, but in a deeply human way. He wanted to know how societies decided who was mad, who was sane, and how those categories were used to control people. Imagine him interviewing doctors, reading dusty asylum records, wandering through hospitals, listening for the echoes of cries that had long since been silenced. His first major book, Madness and Civilization, was basically a ghost story about how society had locked away those it feared, wrapping the idea of madness in chains of stigma and regulation. It was serious scholarship, but also haunting, and it set the stage for his reputation as someone who could turn dry history into eerie bedtime reading. And oh, the look. You can't tell Foucault's story without the image. Bald head gleaming under lecture hall lights, thick glasses perched on his nose, turtleneck hugging his neck like a uniform of intellectual seriousness. He looked like the kind of man who would stare at you silently until you confessed to crimes you hadn't committed. But he could also be surprisingly funny. His friends remembered his wit, his ability to laugh, and his love of music and art. He wasn't just a brain floating in a library. He was a man who lived passionately, who loved deeply, and who occasionally danced at nightclubs where the music was loud enough to drown out even philosophy. His career blossomed as he moved back to France, eventually teaching at the Collège de France, where he gave lectures that were legendary. Students would pack the room, sometimes just to hear him read passages in that voice of his steady, hypnotic, deliberate. He didn't just teach, he performed. He would weave history and theory into something that felt like a spell, and people couldn't help but fall under it. If you're listening to this now, imagining his words as a kind of soft incantation guiding you toward sleep, then you're experiencing exactly what those students did. Philosophy as enchantment. But beneath the performance, he was always working through something deeply personal. His philosophy of power, surveillance, and discipline wasn't abstract. It came from his own life as someone who had lived under scrutiny, who knew what it was to be watched and judged for who he loved, how he looked, what he believed. He once said that his books were little toolboxes, not monuments. He didn't want people to worship his words. He wanted them to use them, to unscrew the hinges of society, peek inside the gears, and see how things actually worked. He wanted us to be awake to the structures around us, even if that knowledge sometimes kept us up at night. Of course, here we're flipping that intention upside down. Tonight, his toolbox of unsettling truths is helping you sleep, because sometimes knowing why the world feels strange is all you need to rest a little easier. Foucault lived fast, thought furiously, and sadly, died relatively young, in 1984, at the age of 57, from complications related to AIDS. His death shocked the intellectual world, cutting short a voice that still had so much left to say. But in a way, his life's work had already achieved what he intended. He didn't want to leave behind dogmas or doctrines. He wanted to leave behind questions, sharp little seeds that would sprout in the minds of readers and listeners for decades to come. And here you are, decades later, lying in bed, drifting to the rhythm of his life story, proving that his questions still whisper through the night. If he feels like a ghost story narrator, it's because he himself has become a kind of ghost, a presence that lingers, watching quietly from the margins of your thoughts, reminding you that the world is never as simple as it seems. He is a companion for insomniacs, dreamers, and thinkers alike. He makes you laugh at the absurdity of brushing your teeth as discipline, and then he tucks you in with the reminder that even prisons can be comfortable if you decorate them well. His life was complicated, brilliant, haunted, and alive with curiosity. And in telling it, perhaps we too can fall asleep a little more curious, a little more haunted, and strangely, a little more at peace. Let your mind drift backward, far backward, into a time when punishment was not hidden behind walls, but staged out in the open air, like a grim theater production. Picture a cobblestoned square, the smell of bread mixing with smoke from torches, and a crowd gathering as if they're about to watch a play. Except instead of Shakespeare, tonight's entertainment is a condemned man having his flesh torn with hot pincers. Or worse. Yes, bedtime stories are supposed to be soothing, and this does not sound soothing. But stay with me, because this is exactly where Michel Foucault begins, in his famous book, Discipline and Punish. He opens with a description so gruesome it makes horror movies look tame. But he's not trying to traumatize you. He's trying to show how radically punishment has changed, and the journey from the square to the cell, from the whip to the wristwatch, is one of the most unsettling and fascinating bedtime tales you'll ever hear. In the old days, punishment was a spectacle, a way for kings and judges to say, "Look at my power. Look at what happens when you defy me." It was public, theatrical, and yes, bloody. Executions and tortures weren't hidden away. They were scheduled events. If you lived in Paris in the 1600s, you might pack a little picnic basket, bring the kids, and watch a hanging or beheading as if it were an afternoon show. The crowd was part of the justice system. By gasping, by cheering, even by fainting, they confirmed that the sovereign's authority was real. The body of the condemned was a kind of canvas, and the paint was fire, rope, or blade. Foucault calls this the age of the spectacle of the scaffold. Not exactly a lullaby, but don't worry, we're heading toward prisons soon, which are far more boring, and therefore much better for sleep. So what changed? Why don't we gather in the town square anymore to watch punishment unfold? Well, Foucault explains, the shift happened because power decided it was more efficient to discipline people quietly rather than make a big show. When executions became riots, when the crowd sympathized with the condemned, instead of fearing the state, rulers realized, maybe this isn't working. Imagine putting on a scary performance and then realizing the audience is cheering for the villain. Not ideal. So, punishment retreated indoors, away from the marketplace, and into the prison. No more fireworks of torture. Instead, endless paperwork, ledgers, and schedules. The punishment of the body turned into the correction of the soul. And this, Foucault insists, is a far more insidious form of control. Think about it. A public beheading lasts a few seconds. Terrifying, yes, but over quickly. A prison sentence lasts years, sometimes decades, and every single day is filled with tiny rules. When to eat, when to sleep, when to walk in the yard, when to return to your cell. It's less dramatic, but in a way more crushing. Instead of showing power with one violent burst, society now disciplines you through countless little restrictions. If you've ever worked in an office where the bathroom breaks were timed, you know exactly the vibe. Foucault's genius is noticing that this logic of discipline spread far beyond prisons. Schools, factories, hospitals, even armies, all of them, became laboratories of control. Bells ring to tell you when class begins. Your desk is lined up in neat rows. You raise your hand to speak. You walk in straight lines down the hallway. These are not punishments. Not really. They are micro-disciplines that shape you long before you ever break the law. It's like society is house-training you. Except, instead of a puppy pad, you get standardized testing. Suddenly, every institution looks a little prison-like, and every day feels a little scheduled by someone else. Isn't that a cozy thought to drift off to? But here's where the humor sneaks in. Because once you see it, it's impossible not to laugh at how ordinary life starts to resemble a correctional facility. You sit at a desk, staring at a clock, waiting for lunch break. You shuffle papers, sign forms, check boxes. The fluorescent lights buzz overhead, humming like bored guards. And you tell yourself, this is just work. But then you remember Foucault whispering, this is discipline. This is the machinery of control. And then, instead of panicking, you yawn. Because recognizing the absurdity of it all is actually liberating. If your office feels like a prison, at least you know the warden is just your calendar app. Foucault shows us that the modern era traded drama for efficiency. We no longer watch criminals broken on the wheel, but we quietly monitor productivity spreadsheets. No more burning flesh in the square, just biometric scans and ID cards at the front gate. Punishment has been domesticated. It wears a suit, not a hood. It smells like printer toner, not blood. And that makes it all the more chilling and all the more perfect for a bedtime meditation. Because nothing makes you sleepy quite like the thought of bureaucratic order ticking away endlessly. Now, let the image settle. The roaring crowd fades, the scaffold disappears, and in its place stands the prison wall. Behind it, rows of cells, identical and silent. The sound of footsteps in corridors, replaces the cries of the condemned, and somewhere inside, a man sits at a desk, recording everything in a ledger. Behavior, progress, failures. It's quieter, it's cleaner, and it's infinitely more controlled. The body may no longer be torn apart, but the soul is slowly bent. And as you drift towards sleep, you realize that discipline is less about chains on your arms than about routines in your mind. You may be free, but only free enough to choose between Pepsi and Coke. And that, my dear listener, is the lullaby of modern punishment. Now, close your eyes and picture a building, not a haunted castle, not a library, but a prison. Except, this prison doesn't look like the dungeons of old. There are no damp stone walls, no creaky chains dangling in the dark. Instead, it is clean, symmetrical, almost elegant. At the center, a tall tower rises. Around it, like the petals of a flower, cells stretch in a perfect circle. Each cell has a window facing the tower, and from that tower, a single guard can see every prisoner. But the prisoners can't see the guard. They never know if they're being watched or not. This, my sleepy friend, is the panopticon, a design dreamed up by an Englishman named Jeremy Bentham in the 18th century. And it is one of Foucault's favorite metaphors for how modern society works. Creepy? Yes, but also oddly comforting. Because once you realize your office is basically a panopticon, you can finally laugh about it. Bentham thought the panopticon was genius. With fewer guards, you could control more prisoners. The trick wasn't constant surveillance. It was the possibility of constant surveillance. Prisoners would behave, not because they were always being watched, but because they never knew when they were being watched. They began to watch themselves. Foucault, reading this centuries later, basically said, "Aha! This is modern power. Power that doesn't just whip you when you disobey, but trains you to whip yourself in your head. You become your own guard, your own disciplinarian." And what could be a more perfect image for bedtime than the thought that the guard might be watching or might be on a coffee break while you brush your teeth? The beauty and horror of the panopticon is how easily it translates into everyday life. Think about your workplace. The boss's office has a window facing the cubicles. Do you know if the boss is looking? Not really. But you straighten your posture anyway. Type a little faster. Pretend you weren't just Googling cute sloth videos. Or think about social media. Do you know who is scrolling through your posts at any given moment? Not really. But you polish your photos, tweak your captions, manage your image, just in case. You've internalized the gaze. You've become both the prisoner and the guard. And once you see it, it's hard not to giggle at how all of us, scrolling late at night, are just digital inmates in a worldwide panopticon with cat memes as our yard time. Foucault wasn't saying Bentham's design literally took over the world. There aren't circular prisons on every corner. But the principle, the invisible gaze shaping behavior, spread everywhere. Schools, hospitals, factories, offices, even families. The possibility of being observed has become enough to keep us in line. And this is where his insight turns bedtime spooky. Because when you lie in bed replaying that awkward thing you said at lunch 3 years ago, you are experiencing the panopticon in your own mind. You are the guard, shaking your head at your own mistakes, and you are the prisoner, shrinking under your own stare. It's surveillance without cameras, punishment without whips. Just you and your inner warden, arguing at 2 a.m. But don't despair. The trick is to find humor in it. Picture the panopticon guard, not as a terrifying authority, but as someone very bored, drinking tea and playing solitaire, occasionally glancing your way. Suddenly, the pressure lifts. Maybe you're not being judged all the time. Maybe the guard is distracted, watching Netflix. Maybe the only person really watching you is you. And if that's the case, you can choose to be a kind guard, not a cruel one. Instead of scolding yourself for dozing off, you can whisper, "Good job. Sleep is resistance." It's funny, too, how modern offices mimic the design without realizing it. Open-plan layouts with managers in glass rooms, security cameras in every hallway, ID badges that log your movements. You can practically hear Foucault cackling softly. See? The panopticon lives. And yet, here you are, safe in bed, cozy, no guard tower in sight. The only watchtower is the glowing phone screen on your nightstand, blinking like a tiny lighthouse, and you can always turn it face down and reclaim the darkness. The panopticon is less about prison bars than about psychology. It works because it colonizes the imagination, and once you recognize that, you can relax. You can see the absurdity of always trying to be perfect, always trying to anticipate the gaze. You can laugh at the idea that somewhere out there, a faceless authority is obsessed with your every move, when really, they probably don't even remember your name. And in that laughter, in that recognition, lies a freedom Foucault rarely talked about, but quietly hoped for, the freedom of awareness. So as you sink deeper into your pillow, let the tower in the center of your imagination blur and dissolve. Let the gaze fade. Know that the watchful eye might not even be there. Or if it is, maybe it's smiling, nodding, approving of you, simply existing. In the dream that follows, the panopticon might transform. Cell walls melting into waves, the guard tower turning into a lighthouse, and the prisoners wandering free across the beach. And you too walk there, unobserved, unjudged, finally resting. For if the panopticon is everywhere, then so is the possibility of peace within it. And in that thought, you are free to close your eyes. If you've ever pictured power as a giant throne with a king sitting on it, waving a scepter and shouting, "Off with their heads! You're in good company." That's the classic image most of us carry. Power, we imagine, is up there, tall, heavy, and dramatic. It comes from above, crashing down on the little people below. Kings, presidents, CEOs, they're the ones pulling the strings, and we're just marionettes dancing awkwardly in the glow of fluorescent lights. But Foucault wants us to put that picture down, gently, like a bedtime storybook, and open a new one. He says, what if power isn't just top-down? What if it's sideways and everywhere, soaking into all the cracks of life like a spilled cup of tea? Suddenly, instead of one throne, you realize the whole carpet is wet. And that's what we're lying on. Even now, drifting into sleep, a world where power doesn't just come from kings, it comes from conversations, habits, gazes, and even your neighbor's opinion about your lawn. Foucault's insight is both unsettling and oddly cozy, like realizing that gravity is everywhere it's holding you down right now, but in a soft, reliable way. Power is like that, except instead of pulling you toward the earth, it pulls you toward conformity. The beauty, or horror, depending on how awake you are, is that it doesn't have a single source. There's no wizard behind the curtain, no secret villain in a swivel chair stroking a cat. Instead, power is dispersed. It circulates, Foucault says. It flows through relationships, institutions, words, even silences, which means that every time your boss frowns, or your teacher raises an eyebrow, or your friend texts K instead of OK, you are feeling power at work. Not lightning bolts from Olympus, but little ripples, nudges that shape how you behave. Think of a school. The old view might say, the principal has power. Sure, the principal has some, but the teacher does too. The students even have power over one another through peer pressure, whispers, laughter. A child who mocks another child for having the wrong kind of sneakers is exercising a form of power, and that power might cut deeper than the principal's authority. Foucault's point is that we can't map power as a pyramid anymore. It's more like a spider web, sticky and everywhere, and we're all spiders and flies at once, sometimes catching others, sometimes caught ourselves. This is why bedtime is the perfect time to think about Foucault. Because lying there in the dark, you can feel all the little invisible strings tugging at you. Why do you brush your teeth? Why do you wear pajamas? Why do you set an alarm for the morning? None of those choices were made by a king. They're the result of centuries of tiny negotiations, cultural expectations, medical advice, and social nudges. Power whispers, brush those teeth, or people will notice your breath tomorrow, and you obey. It's not a tyrant demanding. It's a web of tiny forces shaping you gently, almost like tucking you in. Sleep well, little prisoner. But if power is everywhere, doesn't that mean resistance is everywhere too? Exactly. Foucault insists that wherever there is power, there is resistance. Not just heroic revolutions, but tiny acts of disobedience. A student doodling instead of taking notes. An employee sneaking a nap in the bathroom stall. A teenager rolling their eyes when told to do chores. These aren't just quirks. They're miniature rebellions. Which is funny, because once you see it this way, even your cat ignoring you is practicing Foucaultian resistance. The cat is saying, yes, power is everywhere, but so am I. And you, under the blanket, refusing to check that last email before bed, are resisting too. Sweet dreams, revolutionary. So next time you imagine power, don't look up to a throne. Look sideways. Look at your friendships, your workplace, your family dinners, even your bedtime rituals. Power is there, weaving you into its fabric. Sometimes comforting, sometimes constricting, but always present. And recognizing it doesn't mean you have to fight it all the time. Sometimes it means you can relax into the awareness that the world is structured not just by thrones and crowns, but by whispers and nods. And knowing that, you can let go of trying to find the single source of control, because there isn't one. Power is everywhere, which means you, lying there, eyes closing, are part of it too. And that thought, far from being scary, is strangely lulling. The web holds you. You're safe. You can rest. Now picture yourself alone in a room, not a prison cell, not an office, but just a room. The curtains are drawn, the door is closed, nobody is around. You're safe, you're private, or at least, that's what you think. But then you remember Foucault's voice. Soft, insistent, whispering, you're watching yourself, aren't you? And suddenly you realize, even when no one else is looking, you are. You are the guard in your own tower. You are the watcher and the watched. Welcome to the world of self-surveillance, where you are both prisoner and warden. And the bars are made of your own expectations. This is one of Foucault's most quietly terrifying and deeply relatable insights. In the age of the panopticon, you don't need guards in every corner. Once the possibility of being watched has been planted in your mind, you take over the job yourself. You start to monitor your own behavior, your own body, your own thoughts. You tell yourself, don't slouch. Someone might notice. Or, Don't say that out loud. It sounds weird. And then you realize no one else is there. You're scolding yourself. You've become your own authority figure. Congratulations, you're both inmate and employee of your own mental prison. That's efficient and also exhausting. Think about how often you check your reflection. Windows, mirrors, even your phone screen. Nobody ordered you to do that. But somewhere along the way, you absorb the gaze of others so deeply that you carry it inside you. The mirror in your mind is always there, ready to judge. That's why you delete a text 3 times before sending it. That's why you rehearse what you'll say in the shower. That's why you can't stop replaying that awkward comment you made 3 years ago at a party. Nobody else remembers it, but your inner guard certainly does. He's got it written down in a big, dusty logbook labeled Embarrassing Incidents, Volume 5. And it's not just about appearances. It's about morality, productivity, even emotions. You tell yourself to smile so you don't look grumpy. You force yourself to be productive because the invisible boss in your head insists on efficiency. You scold yourself for being sad, as if sadness were against regulations. You are the one issuing tickets, enforcing curfews, docking your own pay. And no one made you. You volunteered. Isn't that the coziest little nightmare? But before you despair, let's laugh at it a little, because once you see it, it's absurd. Imagine yourself as a tiny guard inside your own skull, wearing a silly hat, clipboard in hand, marching around issuing memos like, "Subject did not floss adequately at 10:04 p.m. Wouldn't you chuckle if you saw that cartoon? That's exactly the point. Recognizing the silliness of self-surveillance is the first step in loosening its grip. Once you picture the guard tripping over his shoelaces or dozing off in his tower, you realize you don't have to take him so seriously. He's you, after all. And you're allowed to be kinder to yourself than a prison warden would be. Foucault didn't think we could ever fully escape this self-watching. It's built into the way society works. From childhood, we learn to regulate ourselves, to anticipate the gaze of teachers, parents, peers. By the time we're grown, we hardly need anyone else to tell us what to do. We do it ourselves, automatically. And yet, knowing this is powerful, because you can decide whether the inner guard is a tyrant or a gentle caretaker. Instead of shouting, "You're lazy," he might whisper, "You're tired. You deserve rest." Instead of scolding, "You embarrassed yourself," he might say, "You were human, and humans are funny." Self-surveillance doesn't have to be torture. It can be self-awareness softened by compassion. So as you drift deeper into your pillow, imagine the guard in your head, putting down his clipboard. He takes off his silly hat. He yawns, stretches, and says, "You know what? I'm tired too." And he curls up on a little cot in the corner of your mind, finally asleep. With him off duty, you're free. Free to close your eyes without judgment. Free to breathe without analysis. Free to drift into the unobserved darkness of dreams. For tonight, you can let the watchtower go dark. No one is watching. Not even you. And that, Foucault would agree, is the sweetest form of resistance. Close your eyes and drift back into the echoing hallways of your childhood school. You remember them, don't you? Long corridors with shiny floors, faintly smelling of cleaning products and crayons. The walls lined with motivational posters telling you to do your best and stay positive, as if a piece of laminated paper could convince you to love fractions. You shuffle into a classroom, the desks arranged in precise rows, the chalkboard looming at the front, and the clock ticking so loudly you could hear each second mocking you. And then it begins. The ringing of the bell. Sharp, metallic, relentless. It tells you when to sit, when to stand, when to eat, when to leave. If you think about it, it's not so different from the bells that toll in a prison yard. You never voted on that sound. You never asked for it. But you obeyed, because that was the point. According to Foucault, schools weren't just places to learn math and spelling. They were miniature prisons designed to train children into the rhythms of discipline. Now, that doesn't mean your second-grade teacher was secretly a prison guard in disguise. Though, if you remember the way she looked at you when you forgot your homework, you might suspect she was auditioning for the role. What Foucault noticed is that the structure of schools mimics the logic of prisons. Rows of desks aren't just about organization, they're about visibility. Teachers can scan the room, eyes sweeping like a lighthouse. And you, tiny student, never know when the gaze will land on you. Raise your hand, don't speak out of turn, follow the rules. This isn't just learning knowledge, it's learning obedience. It's practicing the art of being monitored. Think about the schedule. In theory, it's just about efficiency. We learn math in the morning, art after lunch, science when the post-sandwich nap haze has worn off. But to Foucault, the schedule is something deeper. It's training you to live by the clock. Before you even knew what a time card was, you knew the tyranny of the bell. A loud clang at 8. 0 meant, stop playing. It's time to learn. Another at noon meant, stop learning. It's time to eat. Still another at 3 meant, stop existing here. Go home. The rhythm is relentless. You learn that your body is not yours. Your attention is not yours. Your time is not yours. It belongs to the schedule, the bell, the system. And once you graduate, surprise. The office has been waiting for you all along, with the same fluorescent lights and a slightly more depressing version of the bell. The calendar notification. Even report cards fit into this picture. They aren't just about measuring knowledge. They're about ranking, comparing, categorizing. Every A or C is a number stamped onto your soul, telling you who you are relative to everyone else. Foucault would say it's less about rewarding brilliance than about sorting bodies. Who will obey? Who will resist? Who will be productive in the adult world? You didn't just learn geography. You learned your place in the hierarchy. And you carried that with you, long after graduation, into job evaluations and performance reviews. Report cards never die. They just change stationery. But here's where the humor comes in. Imagine the absurdity of it. Tiny you, forced to raise your hand to ask if you can use the bathroom, as if your bladder has to pass through a bureaucratic committee before it gets approval. Imagine the bell, this shrill little sound, controlling hundreds of kids like Pavlov's dogs. Ding. Sit. Ding. Stand. Ding. Panic. Because you forgot the homework. It's hilarious when you step back. And that's exactly what makes it bearable as a bedtime story. Because when you laugh at the absurdity, the weight of it lifts. And you can let yourself drift into dreams. Schools aren't evil, Foucault would remind us. They're just part of a larger network of discipline. They train us not only to know things, but to behave in certain ways. And yes, that can be oppressive. But it can also be liberating to realize that the prison logic is not total. After all, you're lying in bed now, free from the bell. No teacher is hovering. No one is grading your ability to relax. The only report card you'll get tonight is the one you give yourself in the morning. Did I sleep well? And that, thankfully, is pass. Fail. Now let's wander away from the schoolyard and step softly into the hushed corridors of a hospital. The floors are gleaming. The lights are bright but strangely cold, and everywhere you hear the rhythmic beeping of machines. Nurses move briskly, clipboards in hand. Doctors consult charts. Patients wait in gowns that are basically socially acceptable napkin capes. It all feels clinical, organized, scientific. But if you look through Foucault's eyes, you'll see something deeper. The medical gaze. Not just doctors checking symptoms, but a whole system of watching, categorizing, and defining bodies. And once you see it, you realize that even hospitals and asylums are places where power hums quietly in the background, like the steady hum of a machine by your bedside. The medical gaze, Foucault explains, isn't just about healing. It's about seeing people in a very particular way, as cases, as objects of study, as bodies to be measured and corrected. Imagine you walk into a doctor's office with a cough. You say, "I feel bad." But the doctor isn't interested in your poetry of suffering. They listen to your lungs, they write down numbers, they categorize your symptoms. You're no longer just you. You're a file, a diagnosis, a set of probabilities. It's efficient. It's life-saving. But it's also a transformation. You've been absorbed into the gaze. Asylums, even more than hospitals, reveal the strangeness of this power. In earlier centuries, madness was not treated in hushed wards with padded rooms. The mad roamed the streets, sometimes feared, sometimes pitied, sometimes even revered. But by the 18th and 19th centuries, society decided madness should be locked away, studied, disciplined. The asylum was born not just as a place of care, but as a machine for creating categories, sane or insane, normal or abnormal. And with those categories came control. The patient wasn't just healed, they were normalized. Picture it as bedtime theater. You're lying in a narrow bed, a nurse checking your pulse. She's kind, but she's also observing, noting, recording. The doctor comes in, peers at you through glasses, mutters about charts. You feel seen, but not as yourself as data, as a specimen. This is the medical gaze at work. It's not malicious. It's just relentless. And it shapes how you understand yourself. If the doctor says you're healthy, you believe it. If the psychiatrist says you're abnormal, it sticks. The authority of the medical gaze becomes part of your own reflection. You start to see yourself through its eyes. Of course, there's humor in the absurdity too. Think of the indignity of hospital gowns, designed by some sadistic tailor who decided privacy was optional, or the way you sit in waiting rooms, flipping through old magazines about gardening, while silently rehearsing how you'll describe your symptoms in exactly 30 seconds. "Yes, doctor, my knee hurts." "No, I don't know why." "Yes, I Googled it, and I'm sure it's fatal." The medical system is full of rituals that are both deeply serious and unintentionally comic. And Foucault, standing ghost-like in the corner, would nod knowingly, because those rituals are part of the power structure itself. But before you despair about becoming just another case file, remember, the gaze doesn't erase your humanity. Recognizing it helps you reclaim it. You can laugh at the ridiculous gown. You can sigh at the clipboard. And then you can remind yourself that you are more than a diagnosis, more than a category. You are a whole human, lying in bed now, breathing slowly, safe. And the only gaze upon you tonight is the soft gaze of your own awareness, which is kinder, gentler, and perfectly content to let you drift off into sleep. You might think that writing about sex is the quickest way to make people sit up in bed rather than drift off to sleep. But Michel Foucault, with his dry wit and owl-like gaze, somehow managed to turn sex into a topic that is both fascinating and, strangely, lulling. His multi-volume project, The History of Sexuality, is not a steamy romance or a medical manual. It's more like a quiet detective story about how societies have talked about sex, regulated it, and used it as a way of shaping power. Because, for Foucault, sex wasn't just about desire or biology. It was about control. And when you see it that way, it becomes less blush-inducing and more like a whisper at bedtime about how the most intimate parts of ourselves are never really free from the world's gaze. To understand Foucault's angle, imagine the way people assume that in earlier centuries, sex was a taboo subject, hidden behind lace curtains and heavy silences. We often think that Victorian society, for example, was prudish, repressing desire, forcing it into dark corners. Foucault says, not quite. He argues that society didn't repress sex so much as obsess over it. Doctors, priests, lawmakers, and even census takers wanted to know everything about who was doing what, with whom, and how often. It wasn't silence, it was endless chatter, endless categorizing. Your desire became a kind of case file, tucked into the drawers of medicine and morality. Think of the confessional in a church. A small wooden booth. A priest listening intently. You kneeling nervously to whisper your sins. It seems private, but what's happening is an early form of documentation. Every stolen kiss, every stray thought, becomes part of a long record of human sexuality. Then imagine the doctor's office in the 19th century. Suddenly, the physician wants to know about your nocturnal emissions or your fondness for certain practices. It isn't curiosity for curiosity's sake. It's classification, control, surveillance disguised as science. Here's the funny part. People were embarrassed. People were anxious. But people kept talking. Whole families discussed what the child was doing in bed at night. Schools handed out pamphlets about the dangers of self-abuse. Doctors wrote 1,000-page treatises on what to avoid. If silence had truly reigned, the bookstores wouldn't have been filled with moral manuals, medical encyclopedias, and advice columns about sexuality. So while everyone claimed not to be talking about sex, they never stopped. It was like a society saying, "We don't talk about Bruno," and then producing 1,000 books titled Bruno, a comprehensive guide. Foucault points out that all of this talk wasn't neutral. It wasn't just chatter, it was regulation. By turning sexuality into something to be studied, named, and categorized, society created entire identities. The concept of the homosexual, for instance, wasn't just a description of behavior. In the 19th century, doctors and psychiatrists began to say that a person's whole essence could be defined by who they desired. The homosexual, they wrote, is a species. Suddenly, people weren't just people who did certain things, they were a type of person, a category. Their desires marked their entire being. And with that categorization came stigma, policing, medical interventions. But Foucault doesn't only focus on sexuality in terms of repression or stigma. He wants us to see that sexuality became one of the central ways modern societies managed populations. Governments started caring about birth rates, family health, fertility. Suddenly, your bedroom was of interest not only to priests and doctors, but to politicians. Entire policies revolved around who was reproducing, who wasn't, who should be encouraged, and who should be discouraged. Sex became not only personal but political, woven into the fabric of what Foucault called biopower, the power to manage life itself. And yet, as eerie as this sounds, there's something oddly soothing in recognizing it. Because it means that our anxieties about sex, our endless debates about what is normal or abnormal, aren't just quirks of our individual psyches. They're part of a long history of regulation and discourse. Your awkward teenage moments, your whispered questions, your confusion about desire, all of them were shaped by centuries of society, talking too much and listening too little. That realization can actually feel like a relief, like putting down a burden you didn't realize you were carrying. And if you chuckle at the absurdity, all the better. Picture Victorian doctors wagging their fingers at young men about the dangers of masturbation, warning that it would cause blindness, hysteria, or even death. And yet, somehow, humanity survived. Or think about the endless pamphlets distributed to schoolchildren with titles like Your Secret Enemy, complete with dramatic illustrations of frail, pale youths wasting away. Imagine the seriousness with which adults approach the subject. And then, imagine the reality. Embarrassed teenagers hiding socks under mattresses. Suddenly, the whole thing feels ridiculous enough to laugh yourself gently to sleep. Foucault doesn't resolve sexuality into simple answers. He doesn't say, "Here's the correct way to live." Instead, he asks us to notice how sex is always entangled with power. It's never just a personal act. It's always framed by language, rules, institutions. Even now, debates about sexuality reveal deeper struggles about identity, freedom, and control. By listening to his whispers, we become more awake to how much of our most intimate lives are shaped by forces outside us. And then, paradoxically, we can rest easier, knowing it was never just us. So as you drift off, let Foucault's voice wrap around you like a blanket. Sex, he tells you, isn't just a secret you keep in the dark. It's a language society never stops speaking. But knowing that, you can smile, roll over, and sigh. Because the chatter is centuries old. And tonight, you don't have to add to it. Tonight, the only gaze is your own, and the only intimacy is with your dreams. Now imagine yourself lying on a couch, a soft, ticking clock in the background, the faint scent of antiseptic in the air. A doctor in a white coat peers over their glasses, jotting notes, while you try to explain how you feel. Somewhere outside, the hum of the hospital continues, footsteps, murmurs, doors opening and closing. The setting feels calm, clinical, but also a little uncanny. Because in this moment, you're not just you. You are a patient, an object of analysis, a case. And what you say, what you do, how you look, it's all being filtered through categories of normal and abnormal. This is the world of the medical gaze, and for Foucault, it's one of the most powerful forces shaping modern identity. The idea seems simple at first. Doctors observe, diagnose, treat. But Foucault points out that the act of observation itself is never neutral. The gaze doesn't just record reality, it constructs it. When a doctor tells you that your feelings fall under the label of depression, or that your child's behavior is attention deficit, those words don't just describe, they define. They give shape to experiences, turning them into categories that come with treatments, stigmas, and expectations. Think of the word normal. It sounds comforting, like a warm blanket. Everyone wants to be normal, right? But the flip side of normal is abnormal. And once that line is drawn, entire groups of people find themselves on the wrong side of it. In the 19th century, this was particularly clear in psychiatry. Madness was no longer seen as a passing storm of the soul. It was categorized, charted, dissected. The asylum became the place where abnormality was contained, observed, redefined. The madman wasn't just someone outside society, he became a specimen, studied and shaped by the very institutions that locked him up. Foucault's haunting insight is that categories like normal and abnormal don't just describe the world, they create it. Once you're called abnormal, you carry that label like a tattoo. It shapes how others see you, and eventually, how you see yourself. A child told he is hyperactive might internalize that identity, living up to it in ways he never would have otherwise. A woman told she is hysterical might come to doubt her own emotions, mistrust her instincts. Categories become cages, and we, the categorized, learn to pace within them. And yet, as unsettling as this is, there's something darkly funny about it too. Because when you look closely, the definitions of normal keep shifting. Once upon a time, left-handedness was considered abnormal, a sign of deviance. Doctors and teachers tried to correct it, forcing children to write with their right hands. Today, being left-handed is just being left-handed, perfectly normal. Or consider how homosexuality was once listed as a mental illness in diagnostic manuals. Entire therapies were designed to treat it. Today, that classification is recognized as absurd, harmful, and unscientific. What was abnormal yesterday becomes normal today. And what's normal today might be abnormal tomorrow. Normality, it turns out, is as wobbly as a lopsided chair. This means that as you lie in bed tonight, worrying about whether you're normal, you can smile and let the worry go. Because normal is less a timeless truth than a moving target. If Foucault were here, he'd chuckle softly, light another cigarette, and remind you that the categories shaping your identity are always provisional. They feel solid now, but give them a century, and they'll look laughably outdated. That thought is oddly comforting, like being told that the monsters under your bed are just dust bunnies waiting to be vacuumed. And here's the bedtime twist. Recognizing the power of categories doesn't mean we have to escape them entirely. It means we can approach them with skepticism, with gentleness, with humor. You might still need a diagnosis to get treatment, still need categories to navigate the world. But you can hold them lightly, remembering they are tools, not truths carved in stone. And you can treat others with the same generosity, knowing that what is labeled abnormal today might someday be celebrated as simply human. So let yourself rest. The categories can wait until morning. Tonight, you are not normal or abnormal, not a case file or a diagnosis. Tonight, you are simply you, breathing, relaxing, drifting into dreams. And in the quiet of sleep, all labels fall away. Imagine yourself tucked into bed, cozy under your blanket, when suddenly a little fact tiptoes into the room. It seems harmless, polite even. The earth orbits the sun, it whispers, as if handing you a cup of chamomile tea. Nice, relaxing. Or another fact, water boils at 100 degrees Celsius. Simple, straightforward, dependable, like the ticking of a clock. But Foucault would lean in from the corner of the room, cigarette smoke curling around his head, and say, "Careful, that fact is not as innocent as it looks." Because in his world, knowledge is never just knowledge. Knowledge is power. Every fact, every statistic, every scientific claim carries with it a shadow of authority, a way of shaping how we see ourselves and each other. The idea sounds strange at first. Surely facts are neutral. Surely numbers are clean. But take a closer look. Who gets to decide what counts as a fact? Who designs the experiments? writes the textbooks, sets the curriculum. Behind every tidy piece of information stands an institution, a committee, a set of assumptions about what matters and what doesn't. Facts don't fall from the sky like snowflakes. They're forged in the workshops of power. Consider the census. It seems so boring, doesn't it? People filling out forms about age, race, employment. But the census is not just about counting people. It's about defining them. Categories on the form decide what identities are recognized, what differences are emphasized, what trends are made visible. Governments then use that knowledge to decide where to build schools, who gets funding, what groups are problems that need fixing. A simple fact, X number of people live here, becomes a tool of governance. It tells a story. Not the only story, but the one the counters wanted to tell. Or think about medicine. The diagnosis you receive isn't just an observation. It's a classification. The doctor says, "You have depression." And suddenly, your entire experience of sadness is filtered through a category that comes with drugs, therapies, insurance codes. The fact doesn't just describe it, prescribes. It tells you how to live, what to expect, what your future might hold. And while that knowledge can save lives, it can also restrict them. It can transform a fleeting experience into an identity you wear, sometimes forever. Foucault liked to say that knowledge and power are not separate things, like sugar and flour that can be mixed together in different amounts. They are intertwined, coiled, like strands of DNA. Knowledge produces power, and power produces knowledge. Take sexuality, for example. Once scientists began categorizing desires and behaviors, those categories shaped how people understood themselves. The knowledge created the identities, and the identities reinforced the power of the institutions doing the categorizing. It's not that truth is fake or that we should throw facts out the window. Foucault wasn't saying that water doesn't boil at 100 degrees, or that germs don't cause disease. He was saying that even true facts live in systems of meaning. The fact that germs cause disease is powerful, not just because it's accurate, but because it reorganized entire societies. Hospitals, hygiene standards, laws about food, even the way you wash your hands before dinner. A simple truth reorganized the architecture of daily life. There's humor in this, too. Imagine a fact as a little bureaucrat in a suit, carrying a briefcase. "Excuse me," it says politely, "I'm just here to tell you about boiling water." But behind it marches an army. Health inspectors, science teachers, kitchen appliance manufacturers, government regulations on safe drinking water. The fact is just the friendly frontman. The real power is the system it represents. Suddenly, even your humble kettle feels like part of a global conspiracy to keep you in line. And yet, the tea is still nice. The trick for Foucault is not to distrust knowledge, but to recognize its politics. To see that facts don't just sit there quietly, they do things. They arrange people into groups. They authorize some voices and silence others. They guide behavior, often without us realizing it. And once you see this, you can start to ask better questions. Who benefits from this fact? Who is left out of it? What other truths might be hiding in the shadows? As you lie in bed tonight, listening to the quiet hum of your own thoughts, think of all the little facts swirling in your head. They may seem innocent, but each one is part of a larger story about how the world is organized. And the beauty is that you don't need to unravel it all before sleep. You can let the questions float above you like stars. Each star, a fact. Each constellation, a system of power. You're small beneath them, but also aware. And that awareness is enough. Close your eyes. and let the constellations twinkle softly as you drift away. Now imagine a prison. Not the kind you see in Hollywood movies with dramatic escapes and riots, but the quiet, everyday prison. Gray walls, narrow windows, cells lined in rows. It's not a theater of punishment anymore. As we've seen, it's an institution of discipline. But here's where Foucault's insight digs deeper. He says, prisons aren't just about criminals. They're about society itself. Every time a society debates prison reform, it isn't just asking, how do we treat lawbreakers? It's really asking, what kind of people do we want to be? They're just of B. Sultan reform. The idea is subtle. On the surface, prison seems straightforward. People commit crimes. They get locked up. End of story. But when you scratch beneath, you see that prisons reflect society's values, anxieties, and contradictions. They say something about how we define justice, what behaviors we fear, what bodies we want to control. Prison reform debates whether to make conditions harsher or more rehabilitative, whether to shorten sentences or expand them, are mirrors of our collective soul. Foucault reminds us that prisons didn't just appear out of nowhere. They replaced older forms of punishment, like public executions and corporal torment. The prison was supposed to be more humane, a step forward, a sign of civilization. But from the very beginning, Foucault shows prisons were failures at their stated goal. They didn't eliminate crime. In some ways, they manufactured it. Once labeled a criminal, a person carried that identity like a scar. Released inmates often found themselves pushed back into crime, not out of choice, but because the category society had given them left no other path. In this sense, prisons didn't just punish crime, they produced criminals. And here's where it gets oddly funny in its bleakness. Imagine a society creating a machine to solve crime. They build it, polish it, declare it the future. And then, once it starts running, the machine actually churns out more crime than before. It's like inventing a coffee maker that somehow produces more beans than you started with. At some point, you'd have to laugh at the absurdity. But prisons are precisely that. Machines that perpetuate the very problem they claim to fix. The real purpose, Foucault argues, is not solving crime, but maintaining order. Prisons keep certain populations under control, reminding everyone else of the consequences of stepping out of line. They create categories: law-abiding versus criminal, safe versus dangerous. And those categories ripple out into the rest of society. Police patrols, school discipline, workplace monitoring, all of it echoes the prison model. Reform doesn't just tweak the walls of the cell, it reshapes the very logic of society. When reformers say, "We must make prisons rehabilitative," what they're really saying is, "We want to shape citizens in a particular image." When others say, "We must make prisons harsher," they're saying, "We want fear to discipline society." The debate isn't only about inmates. It's about the rest of us, too. How do we imagine justice? Through mercy? Through control? Through fear? Think about parole boards, probation systems, ankle monitors, community service. Each one is a miniature version of the prison, spreading its logic outward. You may never have set foot inside a cell, but the structures of discipline touch you anyway. The workplace review, the credit score, the airport security line, all faint echoes of prison reform logic. You are judged, categorized, monitored. And in that sense, society itself becomes an enormous correctional facility, with different wings and different privileges, but the same underlying rules. But before this becomes too heavy for bedtime, let's lean into the humor again. Imagine your daily planner as a warden, your to-do list as a parole officer, your Fitbit as an ankle monitor. Every step counted, every calorie tracked, every meeting attended. It's all part of the grand machinery of discipline. And once you laugh at it, once you see its absurdity, the sting softens. You realize you're not just a cog, you're also an observer of the system. That perspective is liberating. So as you rest tonight, picture prison reform not as something distant, but as a reflection of society's restless effort to control, define, and organize itself. When we argue about prisons, we argue about ourselves. And while those debates rage in daylight, you don't have to solve them now. Tonight, you can let the questions dissolve into the quiet. Close your eyes and imagine the walls of the prison melting into clouds, the bars turning into soft beams of moonlight. For a few hours at least, there are no cells, no categories, no reforms, only rest. Imagine walking through a city at night. The streets are dimly lit, the hum of distant traffic, a lullaby in the background. You feel alone, but are you really? Look up, and you might see the red glow of a camera, perched like a quiet owl on the corner of a building. Turn a little further, and there's another, angled just so, catching you as you cross the street. Surveillance has become so common that we hardly notice it anymore. It blends into the architecture, part of the wallpaper of urban life. And yet, Foucault would say, it never stops watching. From the moment you step outside your front door, a choreography of eyes follows you. The CCTV is no longer science fiction. It's a lullaby in LEDs, blinking quietly as you drift through your day. The first wave of modern surveillance was physical. Cameras on poles, guards in control rooms, monitors filled with tiled images of empty hallways and parking lots. There's something almost absurd about how much footage is collected and how little of it is ever actually watched. Rows of screens flicker in security booths, while the guards sip coffee, nodding off at 3 a.m. The great secret of surveillance is that it doesn't need to be constant. The point isn't that someone is always watching. It's that you know they could be. That possibility is enough to change your behavior. Suddenly you hesitate before jaywalking. You straighten your shoulders in a store. You hesitate before slipping that extra packet of ketchup into your pocket. The watchtower doesn't need to be occupied. Its shadow is enough. But cameras were just the beginning. Now, the gaze has followed us home, slipped into our laptops and smartphones, tucked itself into every corner of our digital lives. Cookies on your browser track your clicks, your searches, your late-night wanderings through the internet. Imagine them as tiny crumbs you leave behind in the forest of cyberspace. Except instead of leading you back home, they lead advertisers straight to you. One moment you're Googling how to get rid of fruit flies, and the next day, your social media feed is filled with ads for bug traps, organic sprays, and suspiciously expensive houseplants. The machine is listening, cataloging, tailoring. Your browsing habits become your biography, neatly filed away in data centers you'll never see. It sounds eerie, but it's also funny. Think about the awkward specificity of online ads. You look up a blender once, just once, and for the next 3 weeks, every page insists you need 17 different models of blenders, as if your life's deepest problem is a lack of smoothie technology. Or you buy one pair of socks online, and suddenly the internet decides you're a collector, flooding your screen with endless varieties of socks. Patterned, striped, thermal, bamboo fiber. The logic is ridiculous, but it works, because surveillance doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be persistent. Foucault's insight about surveillance was that it doesn't only punish, It normalizes. Cameras and cookies aren't there just to catch criminals or sell socks. They shape what we think is acceptable, desirable, normal. If you know the cameras are watching, you don't just avoid theft, you walk differently, carry yourself differently, anticipate what's expected of you. If you know your data is tracked, you censor your searches. You think twice before typing something strange. Surveillance doesn't only look at you. It trains you to look at yourself differently. There's a bedtime comfort in realizing this. Because once you notice it, the spell loosens. Instead of being passively shaped, you become an observer of the shaping. You laugh at the Blender ads. You roll your eyes at the sock obsession. You walk past the CCTV and imagine yourself starring in the most boring reality show of all time. Man Buys Groceries, episode 478. Suddenly, the gaze loses some of its sting. It becomes less a prison guard and more a drowsy chaperone. And yet, the gaze never sleeps. Even as you close your eyes now, somewhere, a server farm hums, storing your latest clicks. Somewhere, a security camera records the empty hallway outside a bank. Somewhere, algorithms comb through data, looking for patterns. But you don't need to stay awake, worrying. Let those machines do their endless work. Their watchfulness is not your responsibility. You can let it fade into the background, hum, like crickets outside your window. You are free to rest, even in a world where the lights never go out. Now shift the scene from the city street to your own bedroom. Phone glowing softly in your hand. You scroll one last time, thumb flicking upward in that hypnotic rhythm. Likes, comments, follows tiny dopamine sparks lighting up your brain. It feels casual, harmless. But in Foucault's world, this is not just entertainment. This is the digital panopticon. Social media is where surveillance has become intimate, where the gaze no longer comes from cameras on poles or guards in towers, but from your friends, your followers, strangers you'll never meet. And the strangest part of all? You've become your own warden. You discipline yourself online, one post at a time. Think about what it means to share a photo. You choose the angle, the lighting, the caption. You edit out the messy background, crop the awkward expression, adjust the colors until your skin looks like it belongs in a skincare commercial. Who told you to do all that? No one. And yet, everyone. You've internalized the gaze of your imagined audience. You ask yourself, what will they think? How will this be received? The performance is constant, and the stage is endless. Every like is a pat on the head. Every silence, a little sting of discipline. It's absurd when you think about it. Imagine explaining to a 19th century philosopher that people in the future would voluntarily create detailed public records of their meals, their outfits, their pets, their faces at every possible angle. Imagine telling him that people would not only do this willingly, but obsessively, refreshing the screen to see if others approved. He would probably laugh himself to death before he got the chance to warn you about the dangers of surveillance. And yet here we are, carefully curating digital versions of ourselves for audiences we can't see, audiences who may not even exist. The panopticon principle is alive here. You never know who's watching, so you behave as if everyone island. You delete tweets before posting them. You rewrite captions. You untag yourself from unflattering photos. You are the prisoner, but you're also the guard. The platform doesn't need to scold you. You scold yourself. And when the system does intervene, removing a post, suspending an account, it feels less like punishment and more like a reminder of the rules you already knew, but momentarily forgot. And here comes the humor. Think about how silly the rituals are. People posing with lattes as if coffee has become a sacrament. Influencers contorting themselves into strange positions for the perfect candid shot that is anything but candid. The endless parade of inspirational quotes pasted over sunsets, as if the universe needed a motivational poster. Social media is a carnival of self-surveillance, and once you step back, it's hilarious. The seriousness with which people post selfies, dozens of takes, endless filters becomes almost theatrical. It's Foucault's prison, but with ring lights. But Foucault wouldn't just laugh. He'd remind us that this kind of self-discipline is deeply political. It shapes identities, behaviors, values. It decides what counts as beautiful, what counts as successful, what counts as worthy of attention. Entire economies are built on the need to be seen, liked, followed. The gaze of others becomes the currency of modern life. And you, willingly, participate in your own observation. And yet, there's something freeing in recognizing it. Once you see the absurdity, you can play with it. You can post a silly photo, ignore the likes, laugh at the performance. You can treat the digital panopticon not as a prison but as a stage where you sometimes forget your lines on purpose. The gaze is always there, but you don't have to let it rule you. So as you set your phone down tonight, screen dimming into silence, remember that the audience is gone. The likes can wait until morning. The gaze is asleep, or maybe it never existed as strongly as you imagined. Tonight, you are free from the stage, free from the scrolling, free from the endless rehearsal of identity. You can close your eyes without captions, without filters, without anyone watching. In the quiet of your room, there is no panopticon, only rest. Picture yourself in the morning. You wake up, stretch, and before you even know it, you've already started obeying rules. You brush your teeth for 2 minutes, not 1, not 5. You shower at a temperature that's not boiling or freezing, but just right, the Goldilocks of hygiene. You put on clothes that are deemed acceptable by your workplace or school, not pajamas with ducks on them, though deep down, you know the ducks are far superior. None of these little decisions feel like obedience, but Foucault would smile knowingly and remind you that they are. Rules have slipped into your daily routine so seamlessly that you don't even notice them. They're not enforced by guards or police, but by habits, by expectations, by the invisible weight of what seems normal. The genius of power, Foucault argued, isn't in its brute force. It's in how it seeps into the smallest crevices of everyday life. You think you're just choosing to stand on the right side of the escalator, but really, you're following a shared social script. You think you're simply forming a line at the grocery store, but in that orderly snake of shopping carts, you're practicing discipline. Nobody is yelling at you to do these things, yet you do them. Why? Because somewhere deep inside, the rules have been engraved. They're not external anymore, they live inside you, quietly shaping each step. It's almost funny when you think about it. A grown adult, capable of profound thought, reduced to panic when they see a sign that says, "Employees only." Suddenly, your legs refuse to move forward, as if the door were guarded by an invisible dragon, or the way you instinctively lower your voice in a library, even if no one is around. The silence feels sacred, and you obey it without question. The rule has become a ghost in the room, and you, without even realizing it, are bowing to it. Foucault loved to point out that obedience doesn't just happen in big moments of law and order. It's in the tiny, almost laughable details. How you sit at a desk, how you fill out forms, how you raise your hand in class instead of blurting out answers. Power doesn't need to strike you with lightning bolts. It just needs to whisper routines into your body until they feel natural. You internalize them, repeat them, pass them on to others. Soon enough, the rules are so ordinary that breaking them feels unthinkable. Not because you'd be punished, but because it would feel strange, out of place. Think about dining etiquette. Fork on the left, knife on the right, napkin in your lap. If you eat spaghetti with your hands, no one will call the police. But the stares you'd get would be enough to send you into hiding. Those stares are part of the machinery of power. They don't need words. They don't need force. They discipline you silently, pressing you back into the mold of normality. And you obey, often without realizing that you're obeying at all. There's humor in how absurd some of these routines are. The way people wait at a red light at 3 in the morning, no cars in sight, standing there obediently while the traffic signal blinks like an uncaring metronome. The way we separate work clothes from home clothes, as if fabric knows what time of day at Island. Or the way we check expiration dates on bottled water, as though Ho-Oh is conspiring to go bad. These rituals may not make sense, but they persist, because rules, once absorbed, become second nature. But there's a softness in this realization too. The reason we obey is not just fear, it's comfort. Rules provide structure, predictability. They allow strangers to live together without chaos. Imagine a world where no one followed the rule of forming lines. Airports would collapse into pure anarchy. Coffee shops would be war zones. So, in a way, obedience is a lullaby. It rocks us into the rhythm of shared life. It lets us move together, like dancers in a choreography, so well practiced, we forget we're dancing. As you lie in bed tonight, you can feel those routines humming inside you. They guided you all day, from brushing your teeth to standing in line. But now, with the lights low and your eyes heavy, you can let them go. There's no line to stand in, no library to shush you, no traffic light blinking red. Here, in the quiet of your room, you are free to drift beyond the reach of rules. You can let obedience dissolve into sleep, trusting that the world will keep spinning whether or not you set your alarm. Now imagine the opposite of all this quiet obedience. Imagine resistance, not as fireworks or riots, but as a small, stubborn spark inside you. Foucault never promised a grand revolution to overthrow power once and for all. He wasn't interested in utopias or perfect societies. His vision of resistance was quieter, subtler, but no less important. It was the idea that wherever there is power, there is always the possibility of pushing back. Resistance might not topple the tower, but it can bend its shadow, create little cracks of freedom in the everyday. Think of resistance as the moment when you decide not to obey automatically. You pause. You notice. You ask, why this rule? Who made it? Do I have to? Sometimes resistance is dramatic, but more often, it's gentle, almost invisible. It's the worker who takes a slightly longer lunch break than the rules allow, the student who doodles in the margins instead of copying notes, the patient who asks the doctor a difficult question. These small acts may not make headlines, but they carve out spaces of autonomy. They remind us that the machinery of discipline is never absolute. It's almost funny how small resistance can be. Rolling your eyes behind the boss's back, whispering a joke in class when silence is expected, choosing to wear socks that don't match just because you can. These gestures may seem trivial, but they matter because they reveal that power never fully consumes us. There is always a sliver of choice, a pocket of rebellion. Foucault's hope was not for one big revolution, but for a world alive with little resistances. He knew that power adapts, shifts, mutates, so resistance has to do the same. It's not about overthrowing the castle. It's about planting flowers in the cracks of its walls. It's about refusing to be entirely defined by the categories and rules handed down to you. And here's where the bedtime comfort seeps in. Resistance isn't a duty or a burden. It doesn't mean you have to fight every battle, stay awake every night plotting escape. It means you can choose moments of freedom in your daily life. You can laugh at the absurdity of the rules. You can decide not to take them so seriously. You can be gentle with yourself when you fail to live up to them. That gentleness itself is a form of resistance, a refusal to let the system turn you into nothing but an obedient cog. Foucault often spoke about the importance of creating new ways of being. Resistance isn't just no. It's also yes to something different. Yes to friendship that doesn't fit the mold. Yes to love that defies categories. Yes to creativity that breaks from routine. Yes to laughter in the face of solemn discipline. In this way, resistance becomes less about struggle and more about invention, about imagining new possibilities. And isn't that exactly what dreams are? Each night, when you drift into sleep, your mind resists the rigid categories of daytime. It wanders into impossible worlds, bends rules, creates landscapes that defy logic. Dreams are tiny rebellions against the normal. They are your imagination pushing back, gently but persistently. And so, when you close your eyes tonight, you're not just resting, you're resisting. Picture yourself then, drifting into a dream. The boss is still there, the teacher, the doctor, the watchful eyes of society. But in your dream, you roll your eyes and laugh. The rules dissolve, the walls crumble, and you step out into a wide-open field. Here, resistance is effortless. Here, you are free. And when you wake, you carry a piece of that field with you, tucked in your pocket, ready to remind you that the world's rules are never absolute. Foucault's quiet hope was that we would never stop finding those cracks of freedom, never stop inventing little acts of defiance. And tonight, as you let yourself drift into sleep, you join that tradition, not with banners or protests, but with the simple act of resting in a world that never stops demanding productivity. Sleep itself becomes resistance, the most peaceful rebellion of all. It might be hard to imagine Michel Foucault, the philosopher of prisons, power, and panopticons, as someone capable of humor. His books are dense, his lectures legendary for their intensity, and his bald head and dark turtlenecks made him look like the final boss of French intellectual life. But behind the solemn exterior, Foucault had quirks, idiosyncrasies, and yes, even a sense of humor. And perhaps that's exactly what makes him so fascinating to listen to at bedtime. The reminder that even the most serious thinkers are still human beings with odd habits and moments of laughter that soften the weight of their ideas. One of Foucault's quirks was his fondness for the unexpected. He loved to shake up the way people thought, not only with his theories, but with his presence. In lectures, he had a mischievous streak. Students described how he would deliver a complex passage on surveillance and discipline with total seriousness, then pause, grin, and toss in a sly aside that made the entire room chuckle nervously. It wasn't the humor of punchlines or pratfalls, but the humor of someone who delights in making you realize how absurd life really island. For example, he might compare the classroom to a prison and then casually look around at the rows of students, all staring at him in silence, and say, "Well, here we are." The laughter that followed wasn't just amusement. It was relief, the breaking of tension. He also had quirks in his personal life. He adored certain kinds of music, particularly classical and avant-garde, and his friends remembered him dancing in nightclubs with abandon. Imagine the philosopher of power, the stern figure of academic seriousness, letting loose under strobe lights, cigarette smoke curling through the air, disco beats pounding. There's humor in that contrast. By day, a scholar lecturing on biopolitics. By night, a man moving awkwardly but joyfully on a crowded dance floor. And perhaps that was the point. He lived the contradictions he analyzed. He could dissect institutions with surgical precision, then laugh at himself as just another body caught in the rhythms of society. Another quirk was his tendency to approach life with curiosity that bordered on mischief. He loved archives, digging through dusty documents like a detective hunting for clues. But when he found a particularly strange or absurd piece of history, he didn't keep it at arm's length. He relished the strangeness, chuckled at it, told stories about it. His books are filled with bizarre examples. Doctors warning against self-abuse, wardens designing systems of control that seem laughably over-engineered, priests obsessed with confessions about desire. Foucault gathered these stories not just to frighten us, but to make us see the comedy of history's attempts to control the uncontrollable. There's also the simple fact that Foucault was aware of how terrifying his own theories sounded. Imagine being told, "Power is everywhere, watching you, shaping you, disciplining you, even in your toothbrush routine." That's not exactly light reading before bed. But Foucault's humor softened it. He could step back, tilt his head, and remind his listeners that noticing the absurdity of power is itself a way of resisting it. Laughter becomes a crack in the system. It turns fear into awareness, and awareness into play. Friends described him as warm, with a quick wit. He wasn't the stereotype of the brooding philosopher who refuses to laugh. He liked to tease, to poke fun, even at himself. He could shift from analyzing Bentham's Panopticon to joking about how awful French bureaucracy was. Often in the same breath, his humor was dry, subtle, a little ironic. But it was there a reminder that philosophy doesn't have to be suffocating. And then there's the quirk of his style. Foucault never gave people what they expected. His books read like detective novels, weaving in strange anecdotes, surprising turns, eerie details. He resisted giving definitive answers, preferring to leave questions open, as if he were smirking behind the page, saying, "Figure it out yourself." Some found this infuriating, but others recognized the humor in it. He was a trickster, a philosopher who played with knowledge, showing its fragility while making it sound authoritative. It's the kind of intellectual prank that leaves you puzzled and smiling at the same time. Even his appearance became a kind of playful paradox. The bald head, the glasses, the turtlenecks. He looked like the archetype of seriousness. But in conversation, his eyes twinkled, his smile disarmed. Students often said they expected him to be terrifying, but found him engaging, even funny. The quirk was in the performance. He looked like a philosopher carved from marble, but he lived like a man who knew the absurdity of life. Why does this matter for us, here, in the quiet moments before sleep? Because remembering Foucault's humor and quirks makes his ideas less oppressive. It reminds us that the philosopher of prisons and surveillance was not a ghostly warden hovering over us, but a human being who laughed, danced, teased, and sometimes made himself the butt of the joke. His quirks soften the edges of his theories, turning them from nightmares into bedtime stories. And as you close your eyes, you can picture him, not as a stern overseer, but as a slightly mischievous storyteller, smirking in the corner of your dream, reminding you that even the most serious truths can be funny. Power is everywhere, yes. But so is laughter. And maybe, just maybe, laughter is the quirk that saves us. Now imagine yourself standing in the bathroom, toothbrush in hand, floss dangling between your fingers. It feels so ordinary, so trivial. Yet somehow, you feel a little guilty when you don't floss. That guilt, that tiny pang, is the perfect example of what Foucault meant when he said power slips into daily life. Flossing feels disciplinary because it is disciplinary. It's not about preventing cavities alone. It's about teaching you to monitor yourself, to obey routines, to shape your body into what society deems healthy and acceptable. Suddenly, even dental hygiene becomes a lesson in power. Think about how many rules live in your daily routine. Brush twice a day. Floss. Shower. Eat vegetables. Drink 8 glasses of water. Exercise. Go to bed on time. Wake up on time. Each instruction is small, but together, they create a web of discipline. You might think you're simply taking care of yourself, but underneath lies a system of expectations built by doctors, schools, advertisements, even governments. Your body isn't just yours. It's a project, monitored and maintained under the gaze of invisible authorities. There's humor in how absurd some of these routines are. Who decided that we need exactly 8 glasses of water a day? Who decided that flossing once wasn't enough, but twice was mandatory? These numbers, these guidelines, appear like commandments handed down from on high, but really, they're products of institutions, studies, marketing campaigns, and yet you obey them. Not because anyone forces you, but because the rules have become second nature. Foucault would say, this is how power works best, not through punishment, but through normalization. You don't need a dentist standing behind you every night. You've internalized the dentist's gaze. You floss because you imagine the disapproving lecture you'd get if you didn't. You go for a jog because you picture the silent judgment of medical charts. You track your steps on a smartwatch, obeying the little buzz on your wrist, as if it were an order from a general, and you smile when the app congratulates you, like a prisoner proud of earning good behavior points. But let's be gentle with this realization, because there's something comforting, too, in the routines. They anchor you. They give your day rhythm, structure. They reassure you that you're taking care of yourself, even if the rules come from outside. The trick is to notice the power without being crushed by it, to see the absurdity and smile. Imagine flossing as a tiny rebellion disguised as obedience. Yes, you're following the dentist's rule, but you're also caring for yourself, claiming your body as your own. The same goes for eating broccoli or doing push-ups. They may feel like routines imposed by invisible authorities, but they can also be acts of self-love. Power whispers, do this because you should. But you can respond, I'll do it because I want to. That subtle shift transforms discipline into agency. And sometimes, resistance is choosing not to obey, not flossing once in a while, sleeping in, eating dessert for breakfast. These acts won't topple the system, but they remind you that the rules are not absolute. They can be bent, softened, laughed at. The guilt that follows is just another sign of how deep the rules run. And when you notice that guilt, you can chuckle at it, the way Foucault would chuckle at society's endless attempts to control the uncontrollable. So as you lie in bed tonight, reflect on the quiet rules that guided your day. Maybe you flossed. Maybe you didn't. Maybe you ate your vegetables or skipped them. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you notice how these routines shape you, not with force, but with whispers. And once you notice, you're free to choose to obey, to resist, to laugh. Flossing, in the end, is not just dental care. It's a bedtime story about how power slips into our mouths, our muscles, our minutes, and by recognizing that, you can close your eyes with a smile, knowing that even the tiniest routines carry the echoes of history, discipline, and, yes, the possibility of freedom. Imagine yourself lying back, your pillow supporting your head, your breathing deepening into a slower rhythm. Now it's time to float backward through everything we've explored together. Not rushing, not cramming for a test, but drifting gently as if you were lying on a raft, carried by a calm current. This is the soothing recap, where all the dense ideas of Foucault melt into soft echoes. You don't have to remember everything precisely. You only have to feel the rhythm, the way one idea dissolves into another like waves washing over sand. It began with Foucault as a ghost story narrator. We pictured him not as a dry academic, but as someone whispering to us in the dark, pointing out how the world is stranger than we thought, not haunted by demons or spirits, but by bells, schedules, and routines. He showed us how power doesn't need to roar. It hums quietly, woven into our lives so tightly that we don't notice. This wasn't meant to terrify, but to awaken us just long enough to smile at the absurdity, and then to rest. We followed him into the gruesome public squares of the past, where punishment was once a spectacle. Executions and tortures performed for crowds. But then those horrors retreated behind prison walls, replaced by subtler forms of discipline. We saw how the prison wasn't just about criminals, but about shaping souls. The scaffold faded. The report card emerged. The quiet ticking of the classroom clock replaced the roar of the crowd. The drama was gone, but the discipline remained. We stepped inside Bentham's panopticon, that eerie circular prison where the guard may or may not be watching. We laughed at how much it resembles modern offices. Open-plan layouts with glass walls, managers floating like invisible wardens. But the real point was that we don't need to be watched constantly. The possibility is enough. We start watching ourselves, straightening our posture, censoring our words. The panopticon lives not only in buildings but in our heads. That realization carried us into Foucault's broader insight. Power is everywhere. Not a throne, not a pyramid, but a web, a network. It seeps sideways into classrooms, workplaces, families, friendships. It's in the frown of a teacher, the raised eyebrow of a friend, the bureaucratic forms that quietly decide who belongs where. And yet, where there is power, there is always resistance. Small acts, sly gestures, laughter, in the face of solemn rules. We wandered through schools where the bell told us when to sit, when to eat, when to leave. The rows of desks, the report cards, the way even our bathroom breaks were regulated, all of it training us, disciplining us. And then into hospitals and asylums, where the medical gaze turned bodies and minds into case files, where normal and abnormal became categories that could cage us. But we also noticed how those categories shift. Yesterday's abnormal can become today's ordinary. Left-handedness, once condemned, is now shrugged at. Homosexuality, once listed as a disease, is recognized as part of human variation. Normal is wobbly, and that wobbliness is strangely comforting. We laughed at flossing. Yes, even flossing became part of our story. A tiny symbol of how discipline slips into our mouths, our mornings, our guilt. We saw that knowledge itself is never innocent, that facts are not free-floating, but tied to systems of power. A census isn't just counting, it's defining. A diagnosis isn't just describing, it's prescribing. Even water boiling at 100 degrees reshaped entire societies through hygiene and science. Knowledge and power are twins, inseparable, always holding hands. We drifted through modern surveillance cameras on poles, cookies in browsers, algorithms humming away in server farms. We laughed at the absurdity of Blender ads haunting us for weeks, at sock advertisements multiplying after one innocent purchase. Surveillance doesn't need to be perfect. It only needs to be persistent. It makes us behave, even when no one is watching. And then we turned the lens inward. Social media became the digital panopticon, where we discipline ourselves with filters, captions, and endless refreshes for likes. Nobody forces us to perform. We do it to ourselves. And yet, even here, humor and awareness give us freedom. We can laugh at the rituals of latte photos, at the seriousness of ring lights, at the fact that our digital prisons are decorated with cat memes. From there, we softened into Foucault's humor and quirks. He wasn't just a stern philosopher. He danced in clubs, teased his students, smiled at the absurdity of history's attempts to control desire. He knew his theories could sound terrifying, so he laced them with irony and wit. He reminded us that noticing the comedy of power is itself a kind of resistance. Laughter is a crack in the walls. Finally, we circled back to resistance itself, not a grand revolution, but small acts. Doodling in class, rolling your eyes at bureaucracy, choosing mismatched socks, taking a nap when productivity demands wakefulness. Resistance is not only saying no, but also saying yes to other ways of living. Friendship, love, creativity, dreams, each one a quiet rebellion. And now, in this recap, you don't need to hold every detail. You only need to remember the rhythm. Punishment to prison, surveillance to self-surveillance, knowledge to power, obedience to resistance. It all flows together like waves, each idea carrying you further from wakefulness. Let them swirl in your mind, soft and indistinct, until they feel less like arguments and more like lullabies. Power is everywhere. Yes, but so is laughter. So is resistance. So is the possibility of dreaming. Now the final drift. The lights are low. The ideas have softened. And it's time to let go. Even if the world is a prison, even if rules slip into your toothbrush and your to-do list, you are not locked in tonight. Because dreams are the escape. Foucault spent his life showing us how power seeps into everything, how obedience becomes automatic, how categories and gazes shape our very sense of self. It sounds suffocating, like a net cast over the whole world. But here's the secret he also gave us. Power is never total. There are always cracks, always spaces, always ways to slip free, even if only for a while. And sleep is one of those ways. Think of your bed as a cell, but a cell that protects rather than confines. The blanket is your wall, but it is soft, and it holds you gently. The pillow is the corner of your world, but instead of trapping you, it supports you. This prison is chosen, and within it, you are free. Because when your eyes close, you cross a threshold no CCTV camera can follow, no algorithm can record, no category can contain. You step into a space beyond the reach of power. Dreams resist the logic of discipline. They ignore schedules, bend rules, defy categories. In dreams, you can walk through walls, fly above rooftops, eat dessert for breakfast without guilt. You can laugh at judges, dance past wardens, paint graffiti on the walls of the panopticon. No one can punish you there. No bell can ring you awake. Dreams are rebellion in their purest form. Your mind slipping the leash of obedience. And tonight, You can drift there with ease. Let the rules of the day melt away. No alarms, no report cards, no algorithms tracking your steps. Imagine the watchtower of the panopticon slowly dimming, its spotlight flickering out. Imagine the walls of prisons dissolving into clouds, the categories of normal and abnormal floating apart like balloons. Imagine the endless data points and browser cookies scattering like fireflies. Too small to matter, too scattered to control you. You are free now, free to rest, free to drift into landscapes that belong only to you. Perhaps you'll dream of walking down a corridor of books, each one whispering, each one playful. Perhaps you'll dream of Foucault himself, smiling wryly in the corner, cigarette in hand, nodding as you paint over the walls of his prison with bright colors. Or perhaps you'll dream of nothing at all, the deepest rest, the sweetest silence, where power has no purchase and the world cannot reach you, because sleep itself is resistance. In a society that demands constant productivity, constant vigilance, constant performance, you choose instead to close your eyes. You choose rest. You choose to wander inward. And in doing so, you rebel in the gentlest way possible. No manifesto, no protest signs, just the quiet, defiant act of saying, "Not now. Now I sleep." So breathe slowly. Let your chest rise and fall. Let your limbs grow heavy. Let the prison of the world fade into mist. For tonight, you have found the exit, not through doors or keys, but through dreams. The escape is already here, waiting behind your eyelids. And as you drift, remember, even if the world is a prison, your mind is always more. It is a field, a sea, a sky. And tonight, in your dreams, you will roam free. And now, it's time to let go and drift into your own dreamscapes. Sleep well, rest deeply, and let your mind wander freely beyond the watchful eyes of the day. If by some chance you're still awake, don't worry, I've placed 2 more journeys on the screen for you to explore. Just click whichever one calls to you, and let the story continue. And if you found comfort here tonight, remember to subscribe, so you'll always have a place to return to when the world feels heavy. Good night, and may your dreams be kind.